Donte Whitner did not tiptoe around this one. And that's exactly why this San Francisco 49ers news story is getting attention. When a former Pro Bowl safety comes out and says Ji'Ayir Brown is delusional, that is not just hot take theater. That is a direct shot at a young player's self-image. And for Niners News and Niners News Today, this is one of those conversations that tells you a lot more than just whether a guy had a rough season. It tells you how a player sees himself, how he handles criticism, and whether he understands the gap between belief and performance. And right now, that gap is the whole story. Whitner's argument is pretty simple, and honestly, that is what makes it so sharp. He is not saying Ji'Ayir Brown has no talent. He is saying Brown is talking like a top-tier safety while playing like somebody who has not earned that level of confidence. That is where the word delusional comes from. It is not just confidence. Confidence is fine. Every good player needs it. But once you start claiming you are near the top of the league when the tape says otherwise, you are no longer dealing with swagger. You are dealing with denial wearing a gold chain. And that is what makes this hit so hard for a lot of Niners fans. Because the 49ers have lived through enough of these debates to know the difference between a player who is growing and a player who is talking himself into a better grade. When Whitner pushes back, he is basically saying, I have been there. I know the position. I know what top safety play looks like. And this is not it. That is not some random noise from the outside. That is a former player speaking from the same neighborhood, looking at the same streets, and saying, no, this is not a shortcut to greatness. Now, here's the part that really matters, Niners fan. Whitner's criticism is not just about Brown's talent. It is about the danger of believing your own press when your production is still lagging behind. That is where players get stuck. They stop listening. They stop adjusting. They start arguing with the people who are trying to help them instead of taking the feedback and sharpening their game. And in the NFL, that's a fast track to getting left behind. The league does not care how strongly you believe in yourself if you keep getting exposed in coverage, if your angles are off, if your communication is late, and if your instincts are not matching your confidence. That is why this whole thing has become more than just a podcast rant. It is a test of whether Ji'Ayir Brown can handle being judged like a professional, not like a prospect, not like a hype piece, like a pro. Because once you are in the league long enough, people stop grading you on potential and start grading you on what you actually do on Sundays. And Whitner, whether you like his delivery or not, is basically saying Brown has not crossed that bridge yet. And let's be real, that is the kind of tension that keeps Niners News Today moving. The 49ers are always under a microscope, and every time one of these blunt evaluations drops, fans split into camps immediately. Some people hear Whitner and say, finally, someone said it. Others hear it and say, that's too much. Let the kid breathe. But the truth usually lives in the middle. A player can be criticized too harshly, sure, but he can also talk himself into a ceiling that does not exist. And that is the dangerous part here. So the real question is not whether Whitner was loud. The real question is whether he was right. And once you hear how strongly he framed it, once you hear the confidence behind the criticism, you start to understand why this story keeps landing. Because it is not just about one quote. It is about whether Ji'Ayir Brown is hearing the message or whether he is still trying to argue with the mirror. And that, my friend, is where this gets even more interesting. What makes this whole Ji'Ayir Brown conversation so fascinating is that it is not really about one bad quote or one blunt opinion. It is about the difference between confidence that fuels growth and confidence that turns into a trap. Those two things can look almost identical from a distance, but in the NFL, they are worlds apart. A player who believes in himself is a good thing. A player who starts treating belief like proof is in trouble. That is where Donte Whitner drew the line. And that is why this San Francisco 49ers news story has way more bite than a normal off-season debate. Here is the brutal truth, Niners fan. The league does not hand out awards for self-assessment. Nobody gets points because they think they played well. The only thing that matters is whether the tape agrees. And when a former player like Whitner says Brown is acting like a top safety while showing something very different on the field, that is not just a disagreement. That is a warning sign. Because if you cannot separate how you feel from what you actually did, you are already in dangerous territory. The NFL will humble a guy fast. But sometimes, the bigger problem is when the player refuses to be humbled in the first place. That is why the reaction to this story is so strong. A lot of fans have seen this movie before. A player flashes early, gets some hype, starts hearing the noise, and then the noise gets into his head. Suddenly, every criticism feels personal. Suddenly, every analyst is a hater. Suddenly, the player is no longer trying to improve, he is trying to win the argument. And once that happens, the game starts slipping through the cracks. The footwork gets rushed. The angles get sloppy. The communication gets late. The read and react turns into guessing. On defense, especially at safety, that is a bad cocktail. Whitner's point, stripped of all the heat, is actually pretty old school and pretty fair. If you want to be considered among the best, then act like a guy who understands the standard. That means studying the film, fixing the mistakes, and letting your play do the talking. Not calling people because they criticized you. Not demanding respect before you have fully earned it. Not telling everybody you should have been in the Pro Bowl when the season told a different story. That kind of behavior does not make you elite. It makes you look like you are trying to force the conclusion before the evidence is ready. And that is where the comparison to other NFL personalities becomes useful. The great players usually do not need to announce how great they are. They show it. They let everybody else catch up. If you are truly one of the best, people will argue for you. Not because you begged for it, but because they cannot ignore the production. That is the cleanest path. Quiet work, loud results. And if you need a reminder, just think about how many players have had to reinvent themselves by swallowing their pride, accepting coaching, and taking a hard look in the mirror. That is the separating line between a career that grows and a career that stalls. Now, that does not mean Brown is doomed. Not at all. But it does mean the pressure is very real now, and the next step matters more than the last speech. Because once a guy gets labeled as too stubborn to learn, every mistake becomes heavier. Every missed assignment feels bigger. Every snap gets judged through that lens. That is the reality of playing in San Francisco, where the standard is always high and the patience is never unlimited. The 49ers do not have the luxury of waiting forever for a defensive back to figure it out, while the rest of the roster is trying to win now. And here is the part that should make every Niners fan lean in a little closer. The best response to a story like this is not another argument, it is a correction. If Ji'Ayir Brown wants to flip the conversation, he does not need a podcast defense. He needs a stretch of games where the angles are sharp, the reads are clean, the tackling is reliable, and the coverage finally looks like it belongs in the same sentence as his confidence. That is how you shut people up in this league. Not with volume, with reps. So when people ask what this means for the 49ers, the answer is simple. It means the margin for error at safety is getting smaller, not bigger. It means the spotlight is going to stay hot on Brown until he gives fans a reason to move on from the criticism. And it means this San Francisco 49ers news conversation is really about one bigger question. Can a player with real confidence turn that confidence into disciplined, winning football? Or does he keep getting stuck in his own reflection? That is the puzzle sitting right in front of the 49ers right now, and it is not a small one. The part that should really grab the attention of every Niners fan is this. The 49ers do not need Ji'Ayir Brown to win a debate. They need him to become dependable. That is the whole thing. Dependable. Not flashy for 2 weeks. Not viral after one interception. Not talking like a superstar in April. They need a safety who can survive deep coverage in January when quarterbacks start hunting weaknesses like sharks smelling blood in the water. And that is why this entire San Francisco 49ers news cycle matters more than people think. Because safety is one of those positions where one player being out of sync can wreck the entire structure of a defense. A late rotation, a bad angle, a missed communication, one false step, and suddenly the corner looks bad. The linebacker looks lost, and the defensive coordinator looks like he forgot how football works. That is the burden of the position. You are the emergency exit. When the last line breaks down, everybody notices. That is also why Whitner's comments hit differently than random social media criticism. He talked specifics. He talked technique. He talked discipline. He talked about spacing, eye control, communication, leverage, urgency in transitions, all the little details casual fans barely notice until the ball is flying over somebody's head for a 42 Pantro 10-40-yard gain. That matters because it tells you this is not just emotional yelling, it is football language, and when former players start speaking that specifically, fans listen differently. Now, flip this forward into the bigger picture for Niners news today. The 49ers are trying to stay in a championship window. This is not a rebuilding team handing out patience like free samples at Costco. This roster is built to compete right now. Every position has pressure attached to it. Every weak spot gets targeted. And if the coaching staff feels uncertainty at safety, they are going to look for answers fast. That is just reality in the NFL. You can already feel where this conversation is heading among the fan base too. Some fans still believe Brown can turn the corner because the talent flashes are there. Others are starting to see him as another guy who peaked early, got too comfortable, and stopped developing the details. That divide is only going to get louder if the struggles continue. Because once confidence starts getting interpreted as arrogance, every mistake becomes gasoline on the fire. And honestly, that is the unfair part of playing in today's NFL media environment. The second a narrative sticks, it follows you around like a shadow at noon. If Brown has one blown coverage next season, people are going to immediately connect it back to this conversation. They are going to say, Whitner warned us. They are going to replay the quotes. They are going to ask whether Brown listens to coaching. Fair or not, that is how this works now. Especially with the 49ers, where every little story turns into a 5-alarm debate by lunchtime. But here is where this gets interesting. Sometimes public embarrassment creates growth. Sometimes a player gets called out, gets humbled, and comes back sharper. The NFL has seen that happen plenty of times. Guys who got roasted early in their careers sometimes become the toughest, smartest veterans later because they finally accepted the reality of what the league demanded from them. The question is whether Ji'Ayir Brown has that gear mentally. Can he absorb criticism without treating it like disrespect? Can he separate ego from evaluation? Because if he can, this whole situation could actually become a turning point instead of a downfall. And if he cannot, then the 49ers have a real issue brewing in the secondary. That is why this story matters beyond the headlines. It is not about one angry podcast segment. It is about accountability inside a locker room trying to chase another Super Bowl. The great teams usually have players who can take hard coaching without falling apart emotionally. They adjust, they evolve, they get uncomfortable and then get better. That process is part of becoming a pro. And right now, fair or unfair, people are questioning whether Brown fully understands that yet. So now the pressure shifts onto the field. No more off-season talking points. No more defending reputations. The only thing that changes this narrative is football. Clean football, smart football, winning football. And Niners fan, that is why the next season for Ji'Ayir Brown suddenly feels massive. Because if he improves, this whole thing becomes one of those stories people laugh about later. Remember when everybody doubted him? That is the dream outcome. But if the same mistakes keep showing up, then Whitner's comments are going to age like prophecy. And that is the last thing the 49ers want hanging over a defense trying to get back to the top of the NFC. So now I want to hear from you. Was Donte Whitner too harsh, or did he say exactly what needed to be said? And more importantly, do you still believe Ji'Ayir Brown can become a long-term answer for this defense? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this is one of those Niners news conversations where the fan base is completely split, right down the middle. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications so you never miss any San Francisco 49ers news or Niners News Today coverage. We're pushing hard toward 2,000 subscribers, and every single Niners fan joining the channel helps build this thing into a daily home for real conversation, real analysis, and non-stop 49ers coverage.